Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to IMP's program about getting published. It's wonderful to have you all here today. It's exciting to have so many people interested in getting published. I'm Laura Roberts, and I'm going to host this. I'm not um, presenting. We have three fabulous presenters, um, and went a little too far. And I am joined today by two members of the IMP program committee. Well, many members of the IMP program committee, but two of them who are actually working, Melody Caban and Kashmir Morley.
There. I'm Melody Caban. So, the Independent Museum Professionals is a professional network of consultants and freelancers who work in all areas of museums and with all types of museums. So, our network serves as a central hub, providing resources, knowledge, and connections to IMPs. We are committed to IMPs, fostering strong relationships between professionals and museums, and advancing the broader museum field. So if you're interested in getting involved, and of course you are, we'll provide more info at the end of the session.
Great. And if you are watching Melody and Kashmir, or even me today, and think, wow, that looks like a great job, a great volunteer job, raise your hand and volunteer because our committee could always use some more volunteers, particularly helping out making all of these programs happen. So I want to introduce our presenters today. This is an amazing group of an amazing talent. Um, he's in the middle of the slide, but he's going to speak first, and that's Charles Harmon, who is a senior executive editor at Rowman and Littlefield, which is now part of Bloomsbury Publishing. As we were coming on together, I asked Charles if it was accurate to say that he is at least partially responsible for the majority of books about museums that have been published in America in the last 10 or 15 years. And he admitted that that was true because both as general editor at Rowman, but also doing editorial work for ASLH and AAM, virtually every book that's been published has Charles's fingerprints on it, including the books that have been published by Michelle Moon and Tara Reedy. Young. So Michelle is here mainly. She is an IMP, the principal of Saltworks Interpretive Consulting, and the author of several things that Rowman has published. But she's here primarily today to speak from her perspective as one of the editors of the Journal of Museum Education. And then Tara Young will talk about her experience being an author um, for Rowman and actually for the other major publisher of museum books, Routledge in England. So we're going to let each of them talk for a while. And if you can put your questions in the chat, you can also introduce yourself in the chat if you like. We like the idea of people meeting each other and networking through our programming. So while Charles is starting, maybe you'll introduce yourself. And then after the presentations are done, um, Melody and Kashmir are going to harvest questions out of the chat. So if you leave your questions, we've gotten the questions that you've put in your registration forms. But if we also get your questions out of um, the chat, that would be great too. Um, and I think actually we have pinned the participants, but I think what we want to do is spotlight them, not pin them. Nope, I guess we've spotlighted. Anyway, so Charles.
Thank you. I'm going to talk about how to publish a museum book because that's what I know. I'm less knowledgeable about journal editing. So when you come up and you decide, oh, it's writing a book is something I think I might like to try, the first thing one has to do is to find the appropriate publisher. And in the museum studies field, many associations, like the American Alliance of Museums or the American Association for State and Local History, have publishing programs. There are also commercial publishers, the largest two in the museum studies space being Rowman and Littlefield / Bloomsbury and Rutledge. You can look on those publishers' websites and see what they publish. What kind of books are they? How are their books priced? You can go to exhibits and walk around and find books and see if those look like books where you might want your book to be and speak with editors there. And then most of the book ideas that we work with are either I reach out to somebody and say, hey, I read your article and it sounded good, or I saw your program. Might you want to turn that into a book? Or people send us emails and say, I'm thinking about writing a book on exhibition design. Would that be of interest to you? And if I could have the next slide, please, Laura. Thank you. Thank you. Questions that I would encourage you to ask when you find those people or you start emailing them or meet with them on Zoom. How long does it take you to publish a book? You might be surprised that that varies greatly. Some publishers can offer fairly quick turnarounds. Others, the process can take up to 2 years. If I publish my books with you, do you think that we'll probably sell 50 copies, 100 copies, 500 copies, 5,000 copies? And how will you help make that happen? How does your company market books in the museum studies space? Are you going to pay us a flat fee to write the book? Are you going to pay us royalties? When do you pay? And how much might I reasonably expect to earn? And then what are your rights as an author? What are your responsibilities? And conversely, what is the publisher's responsibility? And then, oh, you anticipated me. Thank you. Most publishers, before we get started, somebody's saying they are not seeing the slides. I am. Yeah, okay, I see heads nodding. Most publishers will want a book proposal from you. Our book proposal has 5 questions. It's very similar to most other publishers. Why is your book needed? How will you go about compiling or writing it? Are you going to write it yourself? Are you going to find chapter contributors and you will act as the author? I'm sorry, as the editor? What's the purpose of the book? What should somebody be able to know or do better after reading your book than they did before they started? Who is the audience? Is your book a textbook for graduate museum studies programs, or is your book for working museum people? What is the market for the book? If your book is on archival collections in art museums, your market for the people who do that is much smaller than if your book was a book on creating exhibitions. And what's the competition for your book? In the last 5 years, who else has published a book on your topic? If you're the only one in 5 years, you probably have a really good idea because the market's wide open. If 4 other people have published a book last year on the same topic, that's going to be a harder sell for the publisher. And the next slide, please. Oh, I'm sorry, that's one too many. Thanks. If you look at a book and you see like most of our paperbacks are published at around $38 to $45, and you start thinking about your book coming out and how much is it going to be, you'll probably wonder, why is my book that much money? It's only 225 pages. Why are they charging $45 for that paperback? Well, regardless of whether the price of the book is $45 or $9.99 or $500, uh, and regardless of the publisher that publishes it, here's where that money goes. Um, Manufacturing means the printing and the binding of the book. How much are we paying for the paper, the cover of the book, to bind it, and to print it? That's manufacturing cost. That's not a lot, 20% of a book's price. Most people think most of the money comes from the cost of printing the book, but no, that's a very small percentage. And if you buy an ebook, it's even less than that since there's no paper and there's no binding. Royalties, most of us pay royalties of about 7 to 15%. Fulfillment means what we have to pay to keep your book on a shelf in a warehouse where a worker can pick it and package it, and what it costs us to ship it. Marketing is 10 to 15%. Oh, 60% of the price you're not getting, and the publisher isn't getting either. Amazon's getting it because we have to give them a discount. Or if you're selling it to a bookstore, it would be someplace like Barnes and Noble, um, Politics and Prose, Books a Million. None of those people are selling the book at a loss. We have to give them a percentage discount off of the list price of the book. And that is usually more than you and we are getting together. Returns. If we sell 50 copies of your book to Amazon at the time it comes out, and they don't sell all of them, guess what? They're returning them and we have to give them their money back. And then overhead, things like paying me so I can pay my mortgage, this is important, is generally about 30% of the book's price. And I have only one more slide to bore you with, please. What is in a publishing contract? Usually something about the manuscript. How many words are we contracting with you to write? How many figures, photos, tables, charts? The grants clause, most publishing contracts require you to give the publisher the exclusive right to sell the work in any and all forms, now known or hereafter invented. A warranty clause, you're warranting to us that everything that you're giving us, either you wrote yourself or you're giving us a permission to reprint it. And if we publish the book and somebody sues us for plagiarism because you lifted 20 pages from another source that's copyrighted, you're responsible for that, not us. Permissions. If you're reprinting a photo from a copyrighted source, we need a permission to do that. Publishing, we will publish your book at our own expense. We won't ask you to pay for anything. Royalties, what percentage are we offering you, and when will we send you a check? Author corrections. Once we typeset your book, please don't rewrite it and typeset pages. We have to start all over again. Send us the manuscript you actually want published. And if you make corrections that are more than 5% based on what you send in, we're going to charge your royalties back for the extra cost. Author copies. We usually give authors 6 copies of their books. Competing works. Most contracts ask you not to publish another book on the same topic while we're trying to sell your book. Don't compete with yourself or with us, please. And revised editions. If your book does really well and 3 years later we'd like to do an updated edition, we would like you to say, yes, we'll do that. And that is the end of my presentation. I'm open for questions now or later, however Laura wants to run it.
Why don't we do questions at the end?
Okay.
I'm realizing as we're thinking about questions, Melody is our museum store guru. So if anybody has questions about placing work in museum stores. I hope Melody will answer those. As soon as you started talking about the discount for stores, I thought, well, we've got the person who knows this stuff with us. Thank you. And there's also, I think, I'm going to anticipate. I know when I did a book for you all, one of the things, Charles, if you can be prepared to talk about this, is because everybody on this call uses the material that they might be writing about in their daily work as consultants. That whole question of whether the author retains the right to intellectual property in their consulting. So
Yes,
if you can be prepared to talk about that when we
you got it.
finish. I know that was something that was very important to me. Okay, Michelle Moon.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming to learn more about publishing. I'm going to be speaking today about publishing in the academic journals that we find spread across our field and adjacent fields. And I just wanted to begin by talking about why you might like to publish in a journal. As you heard at the beginning, one of my roles is to serve as co-editor for the Journal of Museum Education. I'm really proud of that journal. It's the only one that is a regular print journal devoted specifically to museum education, but there are many, and there are certain conventions that go with journal publishing that can make it seem a little bit intimidating, but it's really a pretty well supported and not too complex process. So I really want to encourage folks to consider it. Things you might Reasons you might want to publish in a journal. They're an excellent way to share your findings in a short form of something you may have been studying. If you, for instance, had a grant project to explore a new collaboration or a new type of programming, this is an excellent way to disseminate some of what you learned through that process. You can explore ideas in a journal article, interviewing or referencing scholars in particular areas that might influence your museum practice. Of course, writing is a great way to build your resume and CV. Having journal publications is really a strong resume component, especially if you're interested in teaching or being an adjunct professor. Having some academic publication is a huge asset. Another thing we see people do with their journal articles is call attention to important ideas and issues that may not be getting as much airtime as you'd like to see. And we can see a long history of that at the Journal of Museum Ed, but certainly across the field, this is a place where we work out our new and emerging ideas. It's a chance to reflect, to consider perhaps the long trajectory of some sort of topic that is important in our field, going back to beginnings and tracing through literature review what our evolution has looked like. And finally, just to put things on record, so much of our field is practice. We're in there, developing exhibits, doing programs, putting together fantastic presentations. And so much of our work ends up being ephemeral. If you've presented on it at a conference, you've got that great audience for that 75-minute session, and then often the content evaporates into thin air. Well, writing for a journal is a great way to capture and permanently record some of the important messages you have to share. So we really view the opportunity to document your work in journals as a really important part of chronicling the history of our professions as they develop, and also progressing the work so that we can refer to the past and move forward in an informed way. So we really hope you'll consider it. So where to publish? Just as with publishing a book, the first step is to find the outlet or the publisher that would be interested in what you have to say. And in the museum world, this is just a handful of the most major journals that you may have heard about. The world of journals has its own interesting history, and most of them are published as a collaboration between what's called a society. That could be a nonprofit. In the case of Journal of Museum Education, it's the Museum Education Roundtable. It might be another organization or a scholarly society. That's the group that sponsors the journal, and then they work with a publisher, usually from one of 4 or 5 major aggregate publishing companies, to do that work of hosting and printing and typesetting and disseminating that journal content. So you want to find a journal, get to know that organization and what its goals are, and very importantly, learn all about what its guidelines and interests are, because it's very important to have a good fit between your writing, your piece, and the journal you're going to publish in. So, for example, at the Journal of Museum Education, we often see really interesting and good articles that pertain to museums. But if they're more about museum management or more about collections care, we're not the right fit for that article. So that please pay attention to fit, but get to know the journals that are out there, get to know the ones that are important in our profession. If we look at the next slide, there are a few different pathways into publishing in journals. You can start, if you want to sort of scaffold your way in, a really easy way to get started is to do a review. Most journals will publish book reviews or even exhibition reviews so that you can really summarize and critique that book or that exhibition in your own, giving your own opinion. And those are usually a shorter form piece. And we do need to keep those coming, because journals are one place that we can share news of important publications and landmark exhibitions. So that can be a really good way to get started because they're a little bit of a lighter lift. They're shorter and just don't require as many citations. But then you have a couple of other options. One way to publish is to submit your articles as what we might call a standalone or a single article. It can be on any topic that fits the journal, and it will come in all by itself. So it's something that is a contribution in and of itself. A third way that we and many other journals use is by aligning with a themed issue proposal. So you may be asked by a guest editor to write an article related to a theme that they are going to coordinate a whole journal issue around. So, for example, Queering the Museum is a Journal of Museum Ed issue not too long ago. Disability justice is another. So these are major themes, but within that, there are many articles that you could become part of the cohort that writes. Also, if you have an idea for a major theme that you think there are many perspectives on, you can propose often how a journal issue focused around that theme, and then solicit your own group of authors to help develop articles on that theme. So from kind of smallest to largest, you can go with the review, a standalone article, or take on a whole themed issue if that is of interest. In the next slide, one way to begin, of course, is to be alert to calls for papers. If you were, for example, guest editing an issue, one of the first steps you might do would be to write up and publish a call for papers that's shared very widely. We do this through newsletters, on the internet, on our websites and social media, on LinkedIn, just so we can get the word out as far and wide as possible. A call for papers will typically describe a theme of an issue or a topic area that the journal is interested in receiving articles on, and it will tell you exactly what kinds of questions they're exploring and how to submit a proposal for the article. So a call for papers is a nice way to begin because you don't have to write the whole paper right away. You write a short abstract, submit that, and then perhaps the guest editors or editors will follow up with you to let you know whether that is a fit for this issue or not. Next up, if you're just interested in submitting something outside of the themed issue process, and it's not a call for papers, you are always welcome to submit a standalone article. The old-fashioned lingo for this is to put it over the transom, which means that little window above the door in an office building, where apparently in the old days of publishing, people would push their manuscript over there for an editor to see. So you are welcome to submit articles to journals without anybody's invitation, without telling anybody in advance. And typically you'll do that through a publishing platform. For each journal, though, before you go take that step, do visit the journal's webpage and read about the article submission guidelines, because each journal will have its own set of guidelines for what they accept and don't accept, and also what format they would like to see your article in, including what kind of citation platform or system you're going to use, and even things like the font size and type. And you can save yourself a lot of time if you revisit those areas first. If you go to the next slide, I do want to talk a little bit more about making sure you follow guidelines, but let's go through assuming you've submitted something, your article's about to go on a journey and you're going to go on a journey with it. So one interesting thing about journal publishing is that it's not like submitting a paper in college or graduate school where you submit it, you get it back, and that's pretty much that. It's a long process of revision and checking and proofing. So when you put your paper in, it will first undergo an initial assessment. So the editor, sometimes myself, will look through and say, does this fit with our journal scope? Is this something we would publish, this content? And also on the technical level, can I open your files? Do you have all the attachments? If you're referring to images and figures, are they in there? Is the article complete? Is it ready for reviewers to read? Sometimes an article may come in, more often than not, it's the case with someone writing for whom English is a learned language, and they may have their translation might not be quite smooth enough to make it easy to review. So in some cases, we might say, please have this edited by an English language speaker to make sure that it's in readable shape. And then finally, is it strong enough to have the potential to get through our peer review system? Because that's something that really distinguishes journal publishing, is the peer review process. So once your article has passed those basic checks, the editor will then send your article to peer review. This means that most journals maintain a group of volunteer ad hoc reviewers who stand at the ready to receive an article a few times a year and give it their most thoughtful read. Laura's one of our reviewers, so we thank you for that, Laura. And I know many others on the call as well, who I happen to see your names are reviewing for Journal of Museum Education. And I'm sure many of you review for the many other journals out there as well. So reviewers are people like yourselves, people in the profession with various kinds of expertise. And an editor will typically look for a good fit between the reviewer and the article, so that if someone's, for instance, the article involves a lot of evaluation and the mathematics of evaluation, well, we'll look for a trained evaluator to review that. So we try to make that match. And then our reviewers use a set of criteria to evaluate the article. They'll read it and then consider whether the article is it offering new information? Is it timely? Is it citing all of the relevant work that really needs to be considered on that topic? The review process has a time-honored tradition of being double anonymous. That means that when you submit an article, your reviewers will not know who you are, and you will not know who the reviewers are. And that allows everybody to be as fair and as frank as possible through the process. So it is characterized by respect, as most scholarly traditions are. So this is not a painful process typically, but we do want to remove any possibilities of implicit bias, personal bias. And so reviewers are reading about something and they don't know who the author is. They may not also be able to identify what museum it took place at if it's been thoroughly anonymized. So that's an attempt to give it a fair review. The reviewers, when they're done, submit written recommendations. They will tell the editor whether they think that article should go forward and have more revisions, or whether it really should be rejected as not appropriate for the journal. That's very rare, but it does happen from time to time. More often than not, we move to the next phase of the process, which is rounds of revision. So when the editor decides to work toward accepting the article, they will summarize the results of the peer review and add some additional recommendations. Summarize that typically in an email with a few bullet points and a copy of the article with comments and track changes, and send that back to you, the author. And the authors then revise that and resubmit it. And that continues sometimes many times if there are multiple layers of issues to work on. Sometimes it's a shorter process, sometimes it's longer. It all depends on the review and the nature of the article itself. Going to the next slide, I'm going to share a few tips to make your article hopefully sail through the process. The first one is to follow the mentioned guidelines. Often the first round of revision is all about saying, please format your article according to the guidelines. Please use Chicago citations or MLA citations, whatever the journal calls for. Please make sure your headings are in the right font and case and so on. So that's your first. If you can submit an article that's already pretty clean in terms of how closely it matches guidelines, it's going to be a much quicker process for everyone. My next tip is to make sure your article has a clear point. This is something that we often work on in revision. An article is a short form, and so it really needs to be kind of lean and strong and clear. One thing we often work with authors on is moving an article that starts out as kind of a report that just chronicles activities that happened to an article that's actually making a strong point about a new finding, an important takeaway, a thesis, essentially. There needs to be an argument and kind of a clear point to each article. Just reporting on activities is not enough to make that piece relevant to the rest of the world. So an article that makes a clear argument for why practice should change, evolve, grow in a certain direction, stop doing something, any of those kinds of results is really a powerful way to write. So if you finish the article and you're not sure what it means to anybody else, make sure you've got a strong point. Also, pay attention to structure. Articles like these they can be creative, but they should read in a very linear way where it's easy for me to follow the argument. So an introduction, where are you? What kind of museum is it? What kind of work are you doing? And then activities that you've undertaken or things you've explored, the process you use to get there, the methods, the results, and conclusions. So something that really follows a clear linear structure is often more successful. And then I believe my final tip is make sure there's a clear takeaway. We want people to use these articles and we want them to run into their next staff meeting saying, look at this great article I just read. We should be doing this, or we should stop doing that, or we should talk to someone who knows about this. So if your article can give people something new, a new finding, that is really fulfilling the purpose of a journal in furthering our work and furthering our understanding of our own practice. So that's a quick overview on the nature of journal articles and how to aim for success.
Thank you, Michelle. And the question I'm going to lodge in your head while Tara is speaking is, you did such an amazing service to the field, self-publishing your 10 tips about getting through 2025. So if you can think about the trade-offs of self-publishing and formal publishing, that would be great. Okay, Tara Young. I didn't say when I was introducing her, she's also an independent museum professional as well as on the faculty at Tufts University. So take it away.
Okay. Hi, everyone. So today I'm going to talk briefly about my two projects with Rowman and Littlefield. The first on the left, So You Want to Work in a Museum, is a book that I authored. And the second one, Creating Meaningful Museum Experiences for K-12 Audiences, is a book where I was the editor, and there were 25 chapters written by more than 40 authors. So they're very different books in terms of process, in terms of audience, in terms of my role. And I can talk much more about that either offline or later in the Q&A. But can we go to the next slide, please, Laura? What I wanted to do today is to talk about my top 4 pieces of advice about in terms of actually writing a book like what Charles has spoken about and the books that his company has published over the years. So the first is the importance of a well thought out and clearly written proposal, not only for greater likelihood that your book proposal will be accepted, but for you as the author to create that structure. So if you have a really good proposal, then you can hit the ground running once it's approved, because the whole process happens sort of slowly for a while, and then once it gets started, it happens very fast. So you really have to be at the point of like being ready to start to go once it's approved, rather than at that moment saying, okay, well, how many chapters do I want, and how many inserts am I going to have, and those kinds of things. You really want it to be all laid out in the proposal as much as possible, although you have to also leave a little bit of room for things to shift. Next, please. Make a schedule and be accountable to it, even if it's painful. So one of the first things that Charles will do after he delivers the good news that your book has been approved is ask for a draft schedule. And this, in the case of my first book, I don't remember the exact dates, but it was approved over the summer and the deadline was December 31st. So when I had to list out these dates, it was like a chapter every other Friday or something. And it was painful, and I can procrastinate with the best of them, but having this in black and white and really just adhering to that through the process will make your life so much easier than trying to play catch up, later on in the process. The other thing is that it's not just about you. There are a lot of other people who are waiting for your material to be able to do their job, whether it's marketing or, the sales or all of the sort of things that Charles mentioned as in terms of what goes in to the whole process of writing a book. So those first two are kind of about creating structure for yourself that will help make the process easier. The third is to just write. I mean, I think a lot of us, myself included, have this idea, we sit down at the computer and we're kind of struck by inspiration. And if that doesn't happen immediately, we're going to sit there and wait for it to happen. But really, you just have to show up and do the work. You have to write. It's much easier to revise something that you've written than to just sort of think about it until it's perfect. So I tell my kids this all the time. They're juniors in high school. They're taking AP English literature, and sometimes they'll come to me and say, "Oh, what do you think about this idea for an essay? I have to write this paper. What do you think?" And I'll say, "I don't know about the idea. Write a draft and come back to me, and then I'll have something to respond to. I can't respond to just a concept. I need the words on the page." And a corollary is to give yourself some distance. So whatever it is that you write, give yourself a day at least, come back to it the next day, and you'll sort of have a new perspective. Next slide. Thanks. So the first quote here is one of my favorite pieces of advice about writing, and that is to just write a really shitty first draft. And this goes back to the last point. It's not going to be great the first time you write it. And that's okay. It's part of the process. You're not going to get to something that is great unless you have something on the page that you can work with. And that to me is just really liberating in a sense that, the idea that I don't have to sit down and like write a publication quality piece right now. I just have to get something out that I can respond to later. And the second is Tom Friedman said this at AAM when he was the keynote in Boston in 2022. He said, "I write to learn, to discover what I think." So again, it's really the process of writing that's going to help you figure out what you want to say and how best to say it, how to say it succinctly and to the point, as Michelle was saying. Next, please. The last one is to know when to get out of your own way. So the earlier step that I just described is really intimate in a way. It's just you being very vulnerable, writing something that's probably not very good, like just, getting it out on the page and sort of putting it out into the world. But at some point, it has to go through many cycles of actually getting to be good. Like you have to move on from the shitty first draft to a good final draft. But I think what sometimes happens to me is that as that's progressing, my sort of clinging on to it has not given way. So I tend to be often very defensive when I get feedback at first. I remember, getting feedback from proposals that I submitted to Rowman and Littlefield, and my first response being, sort of getting defensive and saying, "Oh, well, that, how can this person say that? Like this couldn't be true, whatever it is." And then getting over myself and realizing that, oh, okay, it's not about me. Once I put my ego aside, I can see that this is actually a really good point and it's going to make the piece that much stronger. So just being able to kind of hold something close while you're working on in the early stages and then let go of it, let it go out into the world, and give yourself a little, try to detach yourself from it a bit. And a corollary to that is maybe the best piece of writing advice I've ever gotten from a former colleague. And she said, whatever it is that you're holding on to the most tightly in your writing is the thing that most needs to go. So if you're trying to make something fit, whether it's an anecdote, a case study, or in the example of the book that I edited, I had a call for papers. I had to make a selection. I couldn't accept all of the submissions, and I wrote all the titles out on post-it notes and had them all over the walls to try to figure out where everything goes. And if there was something, there were a couple of chapters that I was just trying to force into one or more sections, and finally just realized they have to go. Like, they're not, if something's not fitting, you have to just be willing to sort of figure out what the problem is, and stop trying to put a round peg in a square hole. So again, just very quickly, those are my kind of pieces of advice. If anyone has questions about the specifics of either working as an editor or as an author for these two projects, then I'd be happy to talk to you either one-on-one later or in the Q&A now. Thanks.
Thank you. And so the question I'm going to launch in your head, Tara, as we go back to Charles to ask about intellectual property, is how do you sort of think about the place of your work as an author in your whole constellation of your work as an independent professional and as a teacher and mother and whatever else you're juggling in your life? So Charles, if we can go back to my question about, for all of these people who are charging for their wisdom on a daily basis, how do they protect that intellectual property when they enter into a contract to write about it?
The standard publisher grants clause gives us the exclusive right to market and sell your book. Very often we have authors who will ask us to add a clause into the contract saying that nothing in the agreement prevents the author from using the content of the book in his or her own work. And we're happy for people who teach to take portions of their book to put it into their closed classroom instructional system. We're happy for you to use checklist forms from your book and your consulting work and your teaching. We're not happy for you to photocopy your book and to give it out as a handout. That's not helping you get more royalties from us. It's not helping at all. So if people like to pin us down to specifics, we usually say something like not to exceed 10% of the total work. So something reasonable to let our authors do what they need to do, but not giving away so much that somebody's not going to buy your book.
Great answer. Thank you.
Sure.
Michelle and Tara, you both teach and as well as consult. Are those strictures enough for you? Have you ever had to push back against your editor to say, no, I need more than that?
I personally have not. I've found that, the intellectual property that I use in my work tends to come out through different modalities. I definitely recommend my book that I did with Rowman and Littlefield, and I like the opportunity to have that available as a calling card if somebody, for example, can't work with me either because of geography or funding. They've got something to go on, and so I think it actually makes a pretty good piece of the overall portfolio.
Great. Thank you.
And along those lines, I would add that I often tell people when they're teetering, do I really want to do a book or not? If you're trying to sell your services as a consultant or a facilitator, being known as the person who wrote the book in your niche area is not a bad calling card.
Absolutely. Absolutely. When Anne Bergeron and Beth Tuttle came out with Magnetic and then had a big article based on it in museum, it launched their consulting careers pretty significantly. Significant book, so a significant launch. Michelle, I'm not going to be able to find a link to your great resource. So first answer the question, And then after you're done answering the question, if you could put it in the chat, that would be wonderful. So you've recently made this decision to self-publish. Your excellent guidance about getting through the current moment. What was the thinking about that? Is it going to find some other form? Are you going to turn it into a journal article?
Great question. I wish I had thought through answers for you, and I don't. And I think that's a good example of where self-publishing does have some strengths. Laura's referring to a document that I'll share that's basically a tip sheet of strategies and ideas to consider getting through kind of the political changes we can expect in the coming year. It was done with the support and collaboration of a lot of other consultants who made suggestions and added to it. So it was on the fly, and I was able to do it in such a way that it could turn around almost overnight within a matter of days and be posted and shared pretty widely. So that format worked because of the need to be timely. A journal article on the same topic could take 12 months to work its way through peer review, by which time the realities will have changed so much that it may not be as relevant. At the same time, things that you self-publish may not go through as many levels of review and improvement as they do with a journal article or an edited book, where that peer review process and the editorial process, without exception, always raise the game of an article. There's always something a reviewer will see, suggest, add that makes that piece stronger. So that's kind of the trade-off that you get when you turn around and create your own material and get it out there quickly. So the more eyes tend to improve results. And I was glad to have people give my piece a look on the fly, but it's definitely not the same thing that would come from a pretty rich review process.
You were also responsible for marketing it yourself. So
Exactly. And, I should have added to the why publish in a journal, the articles just from JME, articles are downloaded more than 100,000 times a year. So any one article is being seen potentially thousands of times. And those are going through classrooms, university libraries. They often have a very long life, a very long tail, as it were. So people are still using articles that came out 10 or 12 years ago and are still the best piece on their topic. So if you really are looking for that longevity, then having and the wide dissemination, the resources of a journal are so helpful.
thank you. And as I give Tara the next question, if you could put the link to that in the chat, it would be hugely helpful. Thank you. So Tara, how does you spend a lot of time writing and editing? How does that fit with your thinking about being an independent consultant? And by the way, we are going to get to questions in the chat as soon as Tara answers this. I saw that Patrick had one in the chat, melodies and cashmere harvesting, and we'll go to those after Tara. So how does this fit? How do you justify spending time on writing and editing?
I mean, I think, you know, the Tom Friedman quote about writing helps you figure out what you think. It really does, it's how I process. Even if it's something that no one ever sees, it really helps me crystallize my thinking and identify problems and solutions. So on a practical level, it's just kind of how I think. But also in terms of reputational level, as we were discussing a minute ago, this is just sort of a funny anecdote, but last spring I got a call from AAM, or an email from AAM. They had heard from a reporter at the New York Times who was writing about programs for kids in museums. And they wanted to know if they could suggest me as the person that this reporter spoke to. So I talked to this person based solely on the title of my book. Like, she had never read my book. The article actually wasn't about K-12, it was about family audiences. But I ended up in the span of a couple of weeks being interviewed in the New York Times, the Minneapolis Star Tribune, and being on the San Diego affiliate of NPR, talking about family experiences in museums, which is not what my book was about. So just going back to the idea that it does give you a lot of credibility. It enables you to develop expertise and to share your expertise. And as anyone in the field, whether you're working in an institution or working independently, like that's just huge, not only to help you get your name out there, but but really it works the other way too, that the reason I think most of us write books like this or for the journal is to advance the field, to contribute back to the field, because it's not about, being on the bestseller list. It's really about like, what can we create that will benefit us all?
Thank you. Melody and Kashmir, we have anything from the chat that you want to?
Yeah, it looks like Jennifer has a question for Charles. What kind of support do you as a publisher support the author? I'm thinking particularly about editorial support. And she has the same question for Michelle for journal publishing.
Okay. The way I work is, as Tara mentioned, I ask my authors to send me a schedule for when they will send draft chapters. I respond to those pretty quickly. I respond in depth to the first couple of chapters, and then the author and I may agree, oh, we've got it down now. I don't need to see drafts. But I respond to things like organization, tone, style. Are you writing in a consistent voice? Are you writing in a consistent tense? When your whole manuscript is in, we will then have it professionally copy edited, laid out in pages, and we will have it professionally proofread. So those are our editorial support tiers.
And one of the things you generally don't do is indexing, right? The author does.
Yes, usually our authors do the indexing or pay an indexer.
Okay. And Michelle, how much support does the journal give editorial support does the journal give an author?
We stay pretty hand in hand with authors throughout. Often our relationship begins on submission, but sometimes even earlier in the case of a guest edited issue where we may be providing more detailed and specific guidance on drafts, helping authors avoid duplication and write to the topic. But whenever the relationship begins, we have a pretty robust back and forth, beginning with the initial evaluation, then sharing results of the editorial review, and we'll exchange drafts and answer questions as long as need be. One thing to note that's maybe a bit different in the world of book publishing and journal publishing is that journal editors, it's rarely a full-time job for people to be a journal editor. So you will find there's, sometimes communication may not happen within, quick turnaround time, but you do get that type of partnership that comes from working with someone who shares the field with you and really wants your piece to be a success. That we do have in common.
Great. And Tara, when you edited your book of readings, did you take that job on as the editor, or were you just how much
It's
editorial work did you do as editor of a book?
Yeah, that's a good question. It really varied a lot. I mean, some of the article or some of the chapters were pretty much ready to go. Others didn't even exist, but I sort of commissioned them because I knew that there was a hole or something that needed to be addressed that wasn't yet in the book. So, and there's a question in the chat about what the pros and cons of one author versus several authors. I mean, I think it's kind of apples and oranges, and really the question is who can best address the content. So with my first book, I felt like I had the background and the experience to be able to adequately cover it with some, we did some sort of sidebars of people who worked at different museums. But the second one, I knew that in order to get the best content, I needed case studies from all over the country, and so I knew that I couldn't do that myself. But it's a very different type of process. You have to be really organized. I mean, 45 authors is really a lot of authors, to sort of, from the call for papers to, reminders to editing to getting them to sign off in images. And it was all during COVID. It was like the year 2020 was when it happened. So it's kind of a different skill set. I don't know if that answers the question. But if you want to talk more, you can let me know. But it's kind of different skills, but ultimately it comes down to who can deliver the best content for the topic.
And by the way, Charles, I know you also provide advice and handholding to make sure all of the images are properly vetted and permissioned and all of that stuff.
Yes, that would be important. Yes.
That would be important. Thanks. And by the way, Charles said Tara's book is one of the best-selling books that Rowman's ever put out.
In the museum studies field, Tara's we first published her book in hardcover only, and it sold well. We've then switched to paperback, and I'm happy to say that Tara's paperback has sold thousands with an S copies. Uh, it has a very big audience in uh, college career centers, in high schools, guidance counselors. It does really well. And she wrote that one herself, which is hard to do.
Thank you. Okay, Melody, what else have we got?
All right, from Patrick. Are certain academic credentials required for publication by Rowman and Littlefield? So what about for journals?
Academic credentials.
That'll be for Charles and Shell.
Could you repeat the question? I'm sorry.
Oh, if there's any academic credentials needed, really for publishing a book, for publishing a journal.
Well, I think it depends what kind of book. If you're publishing a book in museum studies, one would certainly expect that the author should have credibility. You have to know something to write something. So I don't think we should say that you have to have a PhD or you have to have a master's degree, but you should certainly have the credentials needed. If you're writing a book like Museums in Motion or a textbook, one should probably have a doctorate.
And Patrick has another question, which is, do you pay advances?
Uh, I work for a large publisher, so we publish all kinds of books. If you came to us with a best-selling novel idea, it wouldn't be on my desk, but I bet they would give you a nice advance. In books in the professional fields that I work with, like museums and libraries, our rule is for your first book, no, we don't pay in advance. If you write a book with us and it does well, for your second book, we will pay you in advance equal to about what we think you'll earn in royalties in the first year.
Okay, thank you. It is 1 minute of 2, and I don't see any other questions in the chat. Melody, do you have any?
We've got another one about the importance of the image on the book covers.
I
Jose
would
Antonio.
say that book covers are probably the area of book publishing where we have some of our least comfortable conversations. I have had authors want to put, oh, I want to put a picture of my 2-year-old daughter on my book cover. Well, that might make you feel good, but I don't think it's really going to help us sell your book. Today, the sort of most important thing is that where most people see book covers these days are the thumbnail images on Amazon. And so the design of the book has to make that make sense. And we don't want to put a picture of your dog on our book cover either.
So I just want to share that I have to have the most boring book cover. And there's 4 of these, and they're all equally as boring. But it also wasn't a very well-selling book. So, okay. Let me just get back to winding up here. You would think that in the last 5 years, I would have actually figured out how to do this. So I want to thank our panelists. We're going to drop their emails into the chat if you want to continue to correspond with them. Michelle and Tara lead complicated lives. As Michelle said, being the editor of JME is not her full-time job, but they are all happy to be in touch with you. Melody.
So if you are looking for more ways to get involved, stay involved and stay in tune with us by volunteering, scan that code, share your program ideas, and use the survey to express any interest or share ideas with us. It really makes a difference. Next one.
Oh. Working on it.
And if you have a moment, we hope you'll complete the survey at the link coming up here. It only takes less than 3 minutes and it makes a huge impact on how we prepare our programs. Take the time, give us your information, and let us know how we did.
And we've got 3 programs coming up in the new year, one with date set, IMPs Connect, which is more of our informal networking program, which will be on January 8th at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. And then we've got volunteers working hard on working out the February and March programs, which are kind of 2 sides of the same thing, setting your project up for success at the outset and then assessing your work at the end. So we've done a lot of programs about the middle piece of consulting. This is about starting out right and closing it out right. And watch for those dates. Everything is on indiemuseumpros.com, which is also where the recording of this will be. And if I've got permission from our panelists, I've gotten a request for the slides to also, and that'll be there as well. As I said, volunteer, send us your program ideas, contribute to the listserv. The listserv is a work in progress. Right now, to get on our listserv, you need to send us an email. And Lori is on the call. Lori and her great communications team will put you on the listserv. But that's how you got to do it. It's a great listserv. So send us an email to do it. Complete our survey, and thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.